I'm Cassandra Turner, but everyone calls me Cassie. I'm 34, living in a modest flat on the edge of Norwich, Norfolk, and until recently, my life was as unremarkable as the drizzle that usually blankets this part of England. Then on a chilly Tuesday morning everything changed. I was making my usual cup of builder's tea when I glanced at the lottery ticket I'd bought the Friday before. Just a tenner spent on a whim at the corner shop. I stared heart-hammering at the 6 numbers that matched perfectly. 35 million pounds. After the initial disbelief, a strange calm settled over me. I decided then and there. No one was going to know, not my family, not my friends, not even my closest confidant. This was my secret. For years I'd felt like the family's financial safety net, the one who patched up holes in other people's lives while barely keeping my own head above water. My parents' split when I was a teenager had fractured our family in ways money couldn't fix. Dad, a physics teacher named Nigel, had remarried Claire, a property agent with a taste for designer shoes and luxury weekends away. Mum, Valerie, had found a new partner in Roger, a successful entrepreneur who clutched his wallet tighter than a miser hoarding gold. My siblings, too, were tangled in their own dramas. My younger sister, Emily, was the golden child, married to a well-paid doctor and living in a sprawling house in the leafy suburbs of Norwich, her life a portrait of perfect Instagram stories. Meanwhile, my older brother, James, 36, was a charming rogue, drifting from one job to the next, perpetually in debt, and a master at borrowing money with promises he never kept. Even extended family wasn't much better. Aunt Maureen, Mum's sister, was the one person who always showed up, despite living in a cramped council flat and working as a primary school teacher. She drove a battered old Ford Fiesta that sounded like a cat with a cold and filled her home with books and plants, never asking for much. In contrast, Aunt Helen, Dad's sister, had married into money and never missed an opportunity to remind everyone of it. She spent family gatherings critiquing my life choices and dropping snide remarks about my job and perpetually single status. Her son, my cousin Oliver, inherited her entitlement but none of her fortune, and he struggled with a gambling habit that the family preferred to ignore that I'd been burnt before by family finances. When James claimed he was going into rehab, I drained my savings to help, only to learn later he hadn't even checked in. When Emily asked for help with her wedding, I put £1,500 on my credit card, a debt that lingered for years. And when Dad needed a loan for roof repairs, I sent what I could, only to see photos of him and Claire on a sun-drenched holiday in Cornwall a month later. Work was no refuge. I was an accountant at a small marketing firm downtown, pulling long hours with little recognition. My boss, Malcolm, had a knack for taking credit for my ideas, while my colleague Tom would sneak off early, leaving me to pick up the pieces. I kept my head down, hoping one day my diligence would pay off, but deep down I knew I was stuck. Buying lottery tickets was my guilty pleasure, a weekly ritual that my family mocked endlessly. Mum called it throwing money at impossible odds, James joked I might as well burn the cash, and Dad lectured me about probability like I was a child. But those tickets were a sliver of hope, a dream of escape. That winning ticket was bought on my 30th birthday. After a brutal week at work where Malcolm had yet again claimed credit for my work, I stopped at Benny's newsagent, the corner shop where everyone knew my name. Benny, a kindly older chap with a permanent twinkle in his eye, greeted me with a happy birthday, Cassie. I handed over £20 instead of my usual tenner, telling him to throw in an extra for luck. Instead of a quick pick, I chose numbers that mattered. My birthday, Mum's, Dad's, Aunt Maureen's, Emily's, and Charlotte's, the latter being my best friend since university, the one constant in my chaotic world. That evening I ordered curry from my favorite takeaway, poured a glass of wine Charlotte had sent me for my birthday, and settled in for a quiet night. The numbers flashed on the TV one by one, and my heart pounded harder with each match. I couldn't believe it. I was 35 million pounds richer. But I didn't sleep. Instead, I devoured stories of lottery winners whose lives had crumbled. Families torn apart, friendships ruined, fortunes squandered. The lottery, it seemed, was less a blessing and more a test of character, and one I wasn't ready to face. By dawn, I'd made my choice. I would claim the prize but keep it a secret. Not even Charlotte would know, at least not yet. I needed time to understand what this windfall meant and to protect myself from the inevitable vultures. I called in sick to work for the first time in years and booked an appointment with Philip Morgan, a solicitor specializing in financial trusts. His office was a sleek glass building in Norwich city center, a world away from my worn-out flat. Sitting in the waiting room, clutching the winning ticket, I felt like an imposter in my threadbare jumper and scuffed boots. Philip was in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and glasses that gave him a kindly but serious air. When I placed the ticket on his desk, his eyes flickered with surprise, but he quickly masked it with professionalism. Over the next 2 hours he explained how I could claim the money anonymously through a blind trust, protect my identity, and build a team of financial advisors to manage the funds discreetly. Most winners fall apart because they tell too many people too soon, he warned. You've got the right idea. Relieved, I left with a folder full of legal jargon and a plan that felt both thrilling and terrifying. I was about to live a double life. The same struggling accountant by day, a secret millionaire by night. Over the next fortnight I worked with Philip to set everything up, trusts, investments, the lot. The money was now safely tucked away, and my life on the surface remained unchanged. I still took the bus to work, still fretted over bills, still drove my ancient Ford Fiesta that groaned every time it started. But the weight of secrecy pressed down on me, and I found myself wondering about my family. Would they be happy for me if they knew? Or would they see me as just a walking cash machine? An idea formed. What if I tested them? What if I told each one the same story? That I'd lost my job and needed £4,000 to cover rent and medical bills, and saw who would help without knowing I had millions. It was a gamble, but after years of being taken for granted, I needed to know who truly cared. With Philip's help, I ensured my finances were airtight and that I had a modest accessible account for emergencies that wouldn't raise eyebrows. Then I crafted my story carefully. The marketing firm had suddenly folded due to fraud. I'd applied for jobs but the market was tight, and my emergency savings were gone after some recent medical tests. I mapped out my targets. Mum and Roger, Dad and Claire, Emily and her husband Mark, James, Aunt Maureen, Aunt Helen and Cousin Oliver. All had turned to me before. Now it was their turn. I practiced the story with Charlotte over a video call. She was uneasy but supportive, reminding me to sound genuine but not desperate. I promised I'd be careful. I predicted the outcomes. Mum would try but come back with excuses, Dad would lecture me, Emily would claim the kids' expenses, James would vanish, Roger and Claire would refuse outright, Aunt Helen would judge, and Oliver would promise help that never came. Aunt Maureen was my only real hope. She had little, but always gave freely. The first call was to Mum. Her voice was distracted but concerned as I told my tale. She promised to talk to Roger but warned they'd just put down a deposit on a holiday home. I wasn't surprised. It was the same story as always. Dad's response was a lecture on financial responsibility, with no offer of help. Emily sympathized but said Mark was strict with money, and their expenses were sky high. James ignored me, as expected. Aunt Helen was blunt and critical, and Oliver disappeared after promising to meet for lunch. Only Aunt Maureen called back, her voice warm and sincere. She invited me for lunch the next day and over chipped ham sandwiches in a dingy cafe. Handed me an envelope with £2,500, nearly all she had. She offered her sofa if I needed a place to stay. Tears welled up as I realized she was the only one who truly cared. That night, I confessed the truth to Maureen. I hadn't lost my job, it was a test. She was sad but understood. She shared her own story of betrayal, how her ex-husband had stolen her inheritance and taught her the painful lesson that money reveals true character. Then I told her the biggest secret. I'd won the lottery. She smiled, eyes shining. You don't owe anyone, Cassie. But I'm here for you, whatever you decide. Her generosity humbled me. I realized that the people who truly matter aren't those who show up when you have everything, but those who stay when you have nothing. That I began making plans. Not just for myself but for Maureen too. Philip helped set up a trust to cover her medical expenses and secure her future. I started thinking about leaving my job to focus on a charity for elderly people living alone. Inspired by Maureen's kindness and resilience, a family meeting was called. When everyone gathered in my flat, I announced I had a new job, a fresh start. I confronted the hypocrisy, the silence, the excuses. No one admitted fault, but the air cleared. I felt a freedom I'd never known. A year later, I live in a cozy terraced house with a garden that blooms every spring. Maureen has a small bungalow nearby, and my charity flourishes, helping hundreds of lonely seniors. Charlotte is my trusted partner in this venture, and my closest friend, whom my family remains distant but honest. None know about the lottery. I've learned that the days after the family meeting felt strangely light, as if a weight I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying had finally lifted. I kept up appearances at work, still showing up to the marketing firm, filing reports, crunching numbers, all the while knowing I didn't need to. The secret of my fortune was locked tight inside me. A prize and a burden rolled into one. I drank my lunchtime tea alone on the office rooftop, watching the city's gray skyline, feeling worlds away from the cramped flat I'd once called home. My wardrobe hadn't changed much, though I could have easily splurged on a new coat or a pair of boots that didn't threaten to fall apart every time I stepped outside. Instead, I held onto my favorite faded leather jacket, the one with the scuffed elbows that told stories of years past, and my worn Chelsea boots that had carried me through rain, mud, and more than a few awkward social situations. There was a quiet thrill in keeping up the illusion. It was like playing a role in a film where only I knew the script. Charlotte was my anchor during this time. She'd come over most evenings and we'd sit on my tiny balcony, glasses of wine in hand, talking about everything and nothing. She noticed how tense I was at first, how I'd flinch at the slightest mention of money or family, but never pressed too hard. Our friendship was a safe harbor, a place where I didn't have to pretend. But the experiment I'd set in motion was far from over. Each day brought a fresh wave of interaction, or more often the lack thereof, with family members who now knew or thought they knew of my troubles. The silence was deafening. Emily's messages were polite but distant. She congratulated me on my new job, a phrase that felt like a slap in the face. James was a ghost. His unread texts piled up like unopened bills. Mum called occasionally, her voice laced with concern but always steering conversations back to her own latest woes. Dad sent emails filled with financial advice, each one a reminder of how little he understood the person I'd become. Meanwhile, Aunt Helen's whispers reached my ears through the grapevine, snide remarks about my financial mismanagement and how she always knew I'd struggled to make something of myself. Oliver's gambling habit worsened, and the family kept pretending nothing was wrong. Only Aunt Maureen remained steadfast, a constant in the shifting tides of my life. She was the quiet hero of my story, the one who had given me everything she could without hesitation or expectation. One chilly November evening, I found myself walking to her flat with a bottle of red and a homemade pie, because nothing says thank you like food, especially when words feel inadequate. I wore my usual jeans and a soft cashmere jumper, the one Charlotte had gifted me last Christmas, its warmth a small comfort against the biting wind. Maureen opened the door before I could knock, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a loose bun, her eyes lighting up at the sight of me. Inside, her flat was cozy, filled with bookshelves groaning under the weight of well-loved novels and plants thriving against the gloom. We sat together in her living room, the fire crackling gently, and I realized how much I'd missed this simple connection, the kind that didn't depend on money, status, or pretense. Maureen spoke softly about the kids she tutored and her plans to volunteer at the local library. I told her about the charity I was building, about the vision I had for a place where people like her, people forgotten by the world, could find support and friendship. She squeezed my hand and said something that stayed with me. "You've got fire in you, Cassie. Don't let anyone dim that." Her words felt like a benediction, but beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. One morning, as I scrolled through my emails over a lukewarm cup of coffee, an unfamiliar message caught my eye. The subject line was curt, urgent, confidential financial inquiry. The sender was a solicitor I'd never heard of, representing a firm in London. My heart lurched. The email detailed an inquiry into a significant financial transaction linked to my name, one that matched the timeline of my lottery claim. It seemed the veil of anonymity I'd carefully constructed was beginning to fray. Panic clawed at my chest. Had the lottery commission slipped? Had someone traced the trust back to me? The idea of my secret leaking to the family, of their reactions, their greed, their expectations, was unbearable. I tried calling Philip, but his office was closed. The weekend was fast approaching, and I was alone with my spiraling thoughts. I paced my flat, debating my next move. Could I trust anyone else with this secret? Charlotte? Maureen? Both had been pillars of strength, but now I feared for their safety too. The money that had promised freedom was starting to feel like chains. That evening, I met Charlotte at our usual pub, the one with the sticky floors and the best fish and chips in Norwich. Over plates of greasy comfort food, I shared the email, the growing fear that my life was about to unravel. She listened, calm as ever, and reminded me that I'd survived worse. "You've got this, Cass. You're smarter than anyone who's out to get you. Just keep your head." Her confidence bolstered me, but the gnawing unease remained. Back at home, I locked the door twice, triple-checked the windows, and sat in the dark, the glow of the city lights filtering through the curtains. The silence was oppressive. I felt watched, vulnerable. Sleep refused to come, and as dawn streaked the sky with pale pink, I realized I was at a crossroads. I could keep hiding, digging deeper into secrecy and solitude, or I could confront the storm head-on. The choice was terrifying but clear. I began drafting a letter, not to my family, not to the lottery commission, but to myself. A promise to stay true to who I was before all this money, to protect the people I loved, and to never lose sight of the woman who had won the lottery but refused to be defined by it. As I sealed the envelope, a sudden noise froze me. Sharp, deliberate knocking at the door. My heart stopped. I wasn't expecting anyone. With trembling hands, I peered through the peephole. Standing there, drenched from the rain, was a man I didn't recognize. His eyes were sharp, his expression unreadable. I stepped back, the letter slipping from my fingers, and realized that the game had changed. The secret I'd guarded so fiercely was no longer mine alone, and whatever was coming next, it was going to shatter everything I thought I knew. That knock at the door echoed in my mind long after I pulled the curtains closed and bolted every lock in the flat. I sat on the edge of the sofa, the letter I just sealed now crumpled in my fist, my breath shallow and uneven. Who was that man? What did he want? The fog of fear clouded my thoughts, swirling with the adrenaline that had me trembling. Despite the warmth of the fire, I forced myself to breathe. This wasn't just about me anymore. The money I'd hidden away, the secret I'd guarded, was no longer a protective shield. It was a beacon. I felt exposed, vulnerable in a way I hadn't since I was a terrified teenager hiding from the chaos of my parents' divorce. The days that followed were a blur of cautious steps and furtive glances. The man never returned, but the knock had changed everything. I began noticing small things. A car parked suspiciously outside my building for longer than seemed reasonable, unfamiliar faces lingering near my usual haunts, a shadow that seemed to follow me on my morning walks. I told no one, not even Charlotte or Maureen. I didn't want to burden them with my growing paranoia. Instead, I doubled down on secrecy, changing routines, varying routes to work, and investing in a modest security system for my flat. Work became a refuge and a prison. I buried myself in spreadsheets and budgets, the familiar rhythm a bomb against the chaos in my mind. Yet, every phone call, every knock at the office door set my heart racing. Meanwhile, the charity was growing. I found solace in the purpose it gave me. A way to channel my fears into something tangible, something good. Helping elderly people who, like Maureen, face the world with quiet dignity despite hardship grounded me. Charlotte was my rock. She noticed the dark circles under my eyes, the way I'd jump at a sudden noise, but she never pressed too hard. Instead, she made me laugh when I needed it most, reminding me that even in the darkest times, there was light. One evening, as we sat on my balcony watching the city lights flicker, I confessed my fears. The knocks, the shadows, the creeping suspicion that my secret was unraveling. Charlotte squeezed my hand, her voice steady. "You're not alone, Cass. We'll face whatever comes together." Her words were a lifeline. But then the unexpected happened. A letter arrived, delivered by hand to my door. No sender's name, just my name scrawled in elegant script. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed but with a message that felt deeply personal. "We know what you have. Be careful who you trust." The message was chilling, a threat wrapped in velvet. Whoever had sent it was watching, waiting. The stakes had risen, and the game had gone from secret to dangerous. I debated going to the police but feared that would only escalate things. Instead, I confided in Philip, my solicitor, who arranged for discreet security measures and advised caution. The paranoia tightened its grip, but I refused to let it control me. I was determined to protect what I'd built, the charity, my life, my dignity. One afternoon, as I met with Maureen at the local library, I noticed a man sitting a few tables away, his gaze fixed on me. My heart hammered. Was he the messenger? The watcher? I whispered to Maureen that I needed to leave and hurried outside, the autumn chill biting my cheeks. That night, as I lay awake, a million thoughts raced through my mind. Had my secret betrayed me? Was the safety I'd fought so hard to create an illusion? Then came a new, more terrifying question. Who could I truly trust? The answer felt agonizingly out of reach, buried beneath layers of betrayal, fear, and uncertainty, and yet, beneath it all, a flicker of resolve burned bright. I had faced hardship before. I had survived family betrayals, loneliness, and self-doubt. This was just another mountain to climb, but as the clock ticked past midnight, a sudden noise shattered the silence. A soft creak in the hallway outside my flat that I froze. The door handle jiggled, someone was trying to get in. The nightmare I'd feared was no longer just a shadow in my mind. It was real, and it had arrived at my door. The sound of the door handle rattling sent a jolt through my entire body, freezing me in place like a deer caught in the headlights. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to hide, to scream, but my limbs refused to obey. The lock held firm, but the intruder was persistent, fingers twisting the knob again and again, the metal protesting under the pressure. My mind raced. I scrambled across the room, heart pounding so loudly I was sure it echoed through the thin walls. I grabbed my phone from the coffee table, hands trembling as I dialed Charlotte's number. It rang and rang until, mercifully, she answered. Her voice was calm but sharp. Cassie? What's wrong? Someone was trying to break in. Please come quickly. I whispered, barely able to breathe. I'm on my way, she said without hesitation. I crouched behind the sofa, clutching the phone like a lifeline, listening as the intruder's efforts grew more frantic. The tiny security camera Philip had installed earlier flickered in my mind. It was supposed to alert the authorities automatically, but I wasn't sure if it had kicked in. Minutes felt like hours. Then suddenly the knocking stopped. The handle ceased its twisting. Silence fell heavy, broken only by the sound of hurried footsteps retreating down the hallway. I stayed hidden for what felt like forever, every nerve on edge, until Charlotte's familiar knock finally sounded on the door. I rushed to open it, relief flooding through me when I saw her soaked hair and worried eyes. We sat on the floor, backs against the wall, breath slowly evening out as Charlotte wrapped her arms around me. You're safe now, she whispered. For the first time in days, the knot in my chest loosened, but the danger was far from over. The next morning, Philip came by with a team of security consultants. They installed reinforced locks, motion sensors, and a discreet alarm system that linked directly to the local police. We reviewed my financial arrangements, ensuring every layer of secrecy was as tight as possible. Despite these precautions, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life was unraveling. The lottery win, once a symbol of hope and freedom, now felt like a curse, attracting unwanted attention and threatening everything I held dear to work. I kept my head down, but whispers followed me in the corridors. Rumors, no doubt, fueled by Aunt Helen's ever-watchful gossip and the family's prying eyes. I heard snippets of hushed conversations, questions about my finances, speculation about the charity, doubts about my integrity. One afternoon, during a staff meeting, Malcolm, my boss, made a pointed comment about lucky breaks and who's really pulling the strings. The room fell silent, all eyes on me. I forced a smile, but inside I felt exposed and vulnerable. Charlotte noticed. Later that evening, over a late dinner at my flat, she said, You don't have to carry this alone, Cassie. Maybe it's time to consider telling someone, a trusted few, about the lottery. Keeping it all inside is eating you up. I shook my head. If they knew, it would change everything. People would come out of the woodwork, expecting handouts, favors. I'm not ready for that, she nodded, understanding but persistent. Just promise me you'll think about it. The charity grew, a beacon of hope in the community, but the shadows around my life deepened. Mysterious calls, subtle threats, the constant fear that someone would find a way to take what was mine. Then one evening, as I returned from a meeting, I found an envelope slipped under my door. No return address, just my name scrawled in an unfamiliar hand. Inside was a single photograph. A candid shot of me leaving Philip's office, looking tired but determined. A note accompanied it. We're closer than you think. My breath caught. The message was clear. I was being watched, tracked. Panic surged, but beneath it a fierce resolve. I would not be intimidated. I had come too far, fought too hard to let fear rule my life. That night I sat at my desk drafting a plan. I would use the resources at my disposal, the legal protections Philip had arranged, the network I was building through the charity, and the unwavering support of Charlotte and Maureen. But most importantly, I would confront the unknown head-on. Whoever was behind this needed to know one thing. I was no longer the frightened woman from my old flat. I was a force to be reckoned with. As I sealed the letter to myself, the promise I'd made to stay true, I heard the faintest sound from the window. A shadow slipped away into the night, and I knew without a doubt that the storm was only just beginning. The night air was crisp against my skin as I stood by the window, watching the shadow vanish into the darkness. A cold shiver traced down my spine, not just from the chill, but from the weight of knowing that someone was out there, moving in the spaces I thought were mine alone. My sanctuary was no longer safe. I closed the curtains slowly, my reflection merging with the dim streetlights outside. The woman staring back at me in the glass was a stranger, a mixture of fear, determination, and something fiercer beneath it all. Sleep was a stranger that night. Instead, I sat at my desk, the soft glow of the lamp illuminating the letter I'd written to myself earlier. It was a vow to keep fighting, to protect what I had built, and to not allow this unseen foe to rob me of my peace. But even as I penned those words, a knot of uncertainty tightened in my gut. How much longer could I keep this up? How many secrets could I guard before the weight crushed me? The following morning, I met with Philip at his office, a sleek, glass-fronted building that seemed worlds apart from my modest flat. He greeted me with a knowing look, the kind that said he'd been expecting me. We sat down in his leather chairs, and I laid the latest developments on the table. The letter, the photograph, the growing sense of being hunted. Philip's expression darkened. This isn't just idle threats, Cassie. Someone has done their homework. You need to be extremely cautious. He outlined a new plan. Enhanced security, a private investigator to trace the source of the threats, and a discreet legal team to prepare for any potential fallout. The cost was steep, but part of the fortune was meant to buy peace of mind, and I was determined not to squander it. Returning home, I felt the invisible chains tightening around me. The lottery win, once a secret treasure, had become a beacon drawing shadows toward me. I thought of Maureen, of Charlotte, and wondered how much longer I could shield them from this storm. Days bled into weeks. The charity flourished despite the chaos swirling at the edges of my life. I found solace in the smiles of the elderly people we helped, in their stories of resilience and kindness. They reminded me of what truly mattered. But the intrusions persisted. Strange phone calls with silence on the other end. Unmarked cars parked too long outside my building. And always the feeling of eyes watching. Waiting. One evening, as I locked up the office after a late meeting, I noticed a figure standing across the street. The street lamp cast his face in shadow, but the posture was unmistakable, calm, deliberate, unhurried. My heart hammered as I hurried to my car, the sound of footsteps quickening behind me. I dared a glance in the rearview mirror. The man was close now, but instead of chasing me, he stopped, raised a hand in a slow, calculated wave, and disappeared into the night. I didn't sleep that night. The image replayed in my mind, the wave, the silence, the threat wrapped in civility. The next day, Charlotte found me nursing a cup of tea, pale and restless. She took one look and said, "Cass, this isn't just about money anymore. It's personal." I nodded, the truth settling like a stone in my stomach. Determined to take back control, I began documenting everything. Every call, every shadow, every uneasy moment. I tightened the circle of trust, confiding only in Charlotte and Maureen, who remained my steadfast allies. Together we plotted ways to outsmart the unseen enemy. Yet, beneath the strategy and the fear, a question haunted me. Who wanted to tear down everything I'd built? Was it family greed, a stranger's vendetta, or something darker? One afternoon, as I sat in the charity's small office, an envelope slid through the mail slot. Inside, a single piece of paper bore a cryptic message. Not all treasures are gold. No signature. No explanation. Just those 6 words, heavy with meaning. I stared at them, heart pounding. Was this a taunt? A clue? Or a warning? The charity's walls seemed to close in, the weight of secrets pressing harder than ever. That night I lay awake, the phrase echoing in my mind. Not all treasures are gold. What if the real treasure was something I'd overlooked? A secret buried deeper than money, something that could unravel everything. And as the clock ticked toward midnight, a sudden knock shattered the silence. This time, I didn't hesitate. I opened the door, and found myself face to face with a woman I never expected to see again. Someone from my past, holding a key to a mystery I was only beginning to understand. The storm wasn't just coming. It had arrived.